Last time we covered the world and story of Final Fantasy XIV, and this time we'll be covering the gameplay, including classes, battling, and dungeons. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Quickplay. Let's start off in Ul'dah, the city I started in as a gladiator/paladin. As we talked about in the last segment, Ul'dah is where the gladiator, pugilist, and the thaumaturge are located. The gladiator is what you'd expect it to be, an altruistic sword fighter. He has lots of sword attacks, buffs and debuffs, and even some magic later down the line. He fills the role of tank. When you start out any class, you only have a first attack, and with a gladiator at the early stages, it can be a bit boring. While the thaumaturge has astral fire and umbral ice bars, gladiators don't even get their tank stance until level 10. Besides that, things are pretty nice. The storyline of the gladiator is interesting, and it focuses around the Blood Sands, a gladiator competition in Ul'dah, one you'll get to fight in by Stormblood. By the time you've reached max level with the Paladin, you have a wide array of abilities in your arsenal, specifically ones to make you stronger or have more defense. Same goes for most other tanks as well, but we'll talk about the other base game classes later. Next, the Thaumaturge. Of course, this is the base DPS magic user from the get-go. A classic dark magic story is included in the questline, and it makes for a fun time. I only played it to level 30, but the time I spent with it was pretty fun. Though, being the first non-tank class I played it, some of the missions where I had to defend the tank NPC were a bit jarring, but I got over it quickly. With the Thaumaturge, you have the states of Umbral Ice and Astral Fire. Astral Fire uses more magic, but does more damage, and can be generated by using fire-based attacks. Umbral Ice uses less magic, but does less damage, but also regenerates your magic while in the state. The abilities you keep the state are ice-based. One of the other attacks you get is lightning. They do damage over time, or DOT, and are useful to put on enemies before you start fighting. The storyline is about these brothers who run the Thaumaturge's Guild, and their one brother who doesn't have an affinity for Aether. It lets you glimpse into a world that you'll probably explore in the Black Mage quests, but again, I didn't do them, so I can't really tell you. Next, let's get into the last class of Ul'dah, the Pugilist. I never played it, so I won't be able to give my full thoughts. The Pugilist is a melee fighter whose job is a monk. It's a DPS class and seems pretty agile, though from some people I know who have played it, they say it's a bit frustrating at first. That's it for Ul'dah, so let's move over to Gridania. Gridania also houses 2 DPS, but instead of a tank, it holds one of the 2 base game healers. The Archer is a pretty simple but useful class, being able to shoot arrows at a distance while moving. It's always good to have one on your team for most large-scale raids and dungeons. I only played it to I think level 7, and while I didn't care for it too much, the whole class seemed useful and fun to play, just not my sort of thing. The Lancer is another DPS class that starts in Gridania. I've never touched it, so my experience can only be summarized as in knowing that it's used to unlock the Dragoon class. And then there's the Conjurer. This is the only healer you can start as, and I've played it to level 50, or a little bit above, I think level 52. It starts you out with only a few abilities, Stone, Cure, Asuna, and Medica, but as you get higher and higher, the job of healing your party becomes harder. We'll get to that a bit later. The plot is pretty fun to play through, and the White Mage stuff is also a bit interesting, even if they do make you go on a massive fetch quest around the continent. Yeah, I liked the White Mage, but it gets very stressful after a while, especially in later dungeons. Limsa is the last base game city we have to cover, and it's got a bunch of classes. It's got the Marauder, the Rogue, and the Arcanist, but you can't start as the Rogue, so you have to get to level 10 with your starter before you can pick it up, or level 15 if you started in a different city. The Marauder is a pretty nice tank class. I played it to level 10 and I'd say it's pretty on par with the Paladin. Being the other base game tank, I expected them to be similar, but the Marauder seems a bit more aggressive in its attacks. The Arcanist is an interesting class because it splits into two, the Scholar and the Summoner. The Scholar is the second healer, and the Summoner is another DPS class. As far as I know, this is the only class in the entire game, DLC or base game, that does this, so it makes it fairly unique. The Rogue is probably what you'd expect if you've played D&D or any other fantasy MMO. He steals stuff, but its job is a ninja, which I always thought was DLC for Stormblood, but no, it's right here in the base game. So yeah, Limsa probably has the most variety and interesting classes, but the other two cities are very fine starting points as well. Dungeons are where everything heats up. At level 15 in the main story quest, you'll be taken to all 3 city-states for meetings, and after that, you'll have a dungeon in each area. Dungeons make use of what you may have learned if you took the Hall of the Novice courses, or throw you into a new, and probably better, way to play your class. At least with the Gladiator, I had no idea what Iron Will did until I got into that first dungeon. If you're playing roulettes with first-timers, it can get frustrating when they don't put on tank stance or run ahead unknowingly, or worse, when a DPS leads the charge. In my time as a white mage, I had this happen a few times, where the tank was so incompetent that one of the DPS had to become the tank for us to succeed. I would heal them, and it would be harder, but it would be better than following a bad tank. A tank's job in a dungeon is to keep all the enemies focused on them. To do this, they have many defensive and offensive buffs, and a tank stance, which automatically rises their enmity until they turn the effect off. You could argue that a tank's job is the most stressful and hardest, but in my opinion, that's only if you don't know the level layout. Once you have it down, it should be pretty easy. Now, the healer, on the other hand, the healer's job is to keep the tank alive. Without the healer, the whole party will fall apart and wipe. To do this, healers have many abilities to aid them. Cures, Asunas, Stones, Regens, all of these abilities aid the healer in keeping the whole party alive, including themselves. The different healer classes have their own perks as well. In the later dungeons, a base game or farther, you'll find yourself knee-deep in complicated combos, meter watching, and way more if you want to do your job well and keep your team alive. A healer can seriously be brought down by a bad tank, though as what you'll truly need to be as successful as a good tank, good healer, and good DPS, you can still succeed. Bad DPS who don't dodge AoEs and stuff will also bring the healer down. All in all, the healer is a pretty good class once you learn how to play it, but can be brought down easily by a terrible party. DPS is the easiest job to have by far. No debate there. The DPS's main job is to put out a lot of damage. If you have a DPS that isn't putting out much damage, expect for the activity to take way longer than it would have with good damage. No matter what level you may be, the DPS will always do more damage than the tank and healer, so while the tank is consistently damaging the enemy, they aren't exactly doing the most damage because the balance with the tank is closer to a higher health, while the DPS have a lower health but higher damage. DPS can seriously affect the healer by not dodging attacks, so the healer has to avert their focus from the tank who's constantly getting damage to heal a DPS that didn't dodge an attack. Of course, some damage may not be avoidable, but being a new DPS in something could seriously affect your team if you can't handle it very well. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's something that could happen. Well, there you have it. The gameplay of Final Fantasy XIV is very complicated, but it should be. It is an MMO after all, and that's what you need from a game that's supposed to keep you lashed in for hundreds of hours. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this episode of Quickplay, and goodbye.